Sitting here, do you prefer John or Chip? I don't know where to start. I always say Chip. Is that the kind of the slang that people use?
I go by Chip.
Just my friends. Friends just call me Chip.
Anything but a derogative
Okay, sure.
word
sure.
I'll answer to.
We're sitting here with Chip in HQ of Topeca. You are the proprietor of this wonderful space. Thank you for being on the podcast. First of all, we're just going to dive in with some questions here. You started first with Topeca. Let's just real quickly give me the origin story of the coffee company that we know today.
For sure. The long story short, born and raised here, moved down to New Orleans to Loyola for college. Met my wife. I was a computer nerd back then. Graduated, we moved to El Salvador, where I was an IT manager for Unilever, and for about 2 years.
Okay.
We decided to get married, have children, and
Yeah.
you know, since Salvador is the main city that you'd have to live in, and it's like any big city, commute was, I don't know, minimum 30 up to an hour.
Okay.
So it wasn't a place I wanted to live and raise a family, and so we decided to move back to Tulsa, somewhere where when I left, I thought I was never coming back. But you know, life changes. So we moved back here. I was working in IT still, and then I got my MBA. And while I got my MBA is when Topeca started. And so my mother-in-law came and visited her new grandchild. Coffee market had dropped to an all-time low of about 42 cents a pound.
Okay.
Cost of production was in the 80s to 90 cents per pound. You can do the math. A saying I've said many times is the business-minded person would sit on their assets, so to speak.
Sure.
And wait until the market went back up. It took years. But every country is different. There's a reason why a quarter pounder in Zurich, Switzerland costs a lot more than it does in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Sure.
And so structure in El Salvador is such that there's super dense population. The proximity from the farming to the urban is really close. And so most producing countries like Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, they all have migrant workers because there's just so much more land. Salvador's smaller than Rhode Island. Rhode Island's neither a road nor an island. Talks amongst themselves. And so it's unique. It has generations of people that have worked for my mother-in-law that she didn't want to just boot to the street, right? And so she kept operating at a loss and came to myself, and my brother-in-law was getting was graduating from undergrad at University of Portland.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I don't know, 2001, 2002. And so, you know, that was right when a lot of companies like Starbucks were really capturing this market and creating this market. And the amount that we were paying never really went down. But the farms were just struggling left and right. And so we started the process of creating what is now Topeca. It took and still is taking. There's a reason why usually coffee's touched by so many hands. Like, it's a very large barrier to entry to be able to create a system that can logistically and effectively, robustly manage the different layers of supply chain.
Sure.
It is a logistics game. One might say nightmare, but I like to say it's just a game.
Just because you're figuring out not only where can you get it, but where you can get it the cheapest. Where still marginally is
Not
worth
necessarily. It's that there's just a lot of steps involved.
Okay.
And there are a lot of places where it can either the coffee itself can go bad, or it can get stuck and affects timing.
Import, export. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
It's large in volume, and so it's like once we didn't realize that the weight limit on highways had changed, and we were over by like 1,000 pounds or something, and so it cost us a ton of money. Our two options were to pay someone in Houston to manually remove one bag at a time and transfer them to two separate containers, which is gonna be ridiculous, or we had to wait like 2 weeks and transfer the container to a special bed that had like an extra axle to be able to distribute. You know, it was nuts. And it was just something we didn't think of, right?
Right.
Sometimes there are, like, if anytime our coffee usually goes through Houston from El Salvador. So it goes to El Salvador by truck through Guatemala to the port in Guatemala, Guatemala to Houston, Houston to Tulsa.
Sure.
And anytime it's gone through like LA, half the times it feels like, I'm exaggerating, but it feels like a very large number of times it's been stuck by huelga. And that's strikes.
Okay.
Yeah, and once that happens, there's just nothing you can do about it.
Right.
And so doing each one of those, it requires us to we manage each segment of the business separately, making sure that the accounting is there and that we know that each one is actually making a profit. But we want to make sure, the only way to know whether or not it's making a profit or stealing from another business is if you're actually accounting for it.
Sure. I remember a story that I think I've heard a couple times here, but you were initially roasting, I don't know what year this was, in the Mayo Hotel.
It was.
Was that the first location? Is that where you could put it? Was Macy and crew, like, what was that? The agreement is to supply the hotel and you can roast here? Or like, what was that situation?
Yeah, so we started in 2001 in El Salvador, 2002 in Tulsa.
Okay.
We originally were a logistical nightmare. This was a nightmare. DHL had just entered the market.
Okay.
They were undercutting everybody in the market. We were able to roast the coffee on the farm and actually ship it and get it here within 3 days, airship it.
Oh, wow.
And it worked great for the first couple of months. And then after that, the quality, the bags started coming squished, the bags squished and the prices skyrocketed and it just became a nightmare. And so we placed an order in 2003 or 4. I think it was 2003. We put the order in. It's all blurry now, but and then it finally came about a year after, around late 2004. Started roasting around 2004, 2005. And back then there wasn't a hotel, right? In 2004, 2005, it was gutted.
I was just saying, when did they get up at? Because I was just trying to do the math in my head.
They didn't have plans for the hotel yet at all.
Okay.
At that point, it was just weddings. There was nothing around us.
Just the big ballroom upstairs.
I would work all day out amongst the humans, and then at night I would go roast. And that whole cafe area was full of just pallets of coffee. It was so funny looking to be like in the middle of an urban downtown in a retail space full. And what was cool it was originally the cafe of the Mayo Hotel, and the J. Paul Gating used to sit down at the cafe, and the bolt studs in the ground were still there where the stools were, and it was a cool piece of moment in history.
Sure, I bet. Yeah.
So we would roast there. People would like stare through the windows as I would roast.
Yeah.
Because I would have the lights all off and just one focus light on myself and the roaster. And then around 2007, we were going to do the roasting and a coffee shop, but roasting had grown so much, we moved it out last minute.
Okay.
And we had a temporary location where we were at for like a year or so, and then we bought the building where we're at now.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Topeca, so it's, as an entrepreneur myself and meeting and chatting with a lot of Tulsa entrepreneurs, I've probably heard you say this already 3 or 4 times in this conversation already, is nightmare. Yeah. This idea of a hurdle, idea of a block, of some sort of thing. We've all had them. And it's just funny that it doesn't matter what you're growing, it doesn't matter what you're building, you have opposition. What have you found, before we got started here, you had mentioned that you're a perfectionist. Mm-hmm. You like things, if there's an issue, it's just like, okay, now my guess is, very hyper-focused, very detail-oriented, in the weeds of why did this happen? How can we prevent it? I don't know. I'm putting words maybe in your mouth here, but how do you work through nightmares?
So I used to be of the nature that, like, when I bought the roaster, I just took it apart and then put it back together because I knew that it was going to break, and so I would have to know how to do it, right? When I bought my first espresso machine, I took it apart and put it back together more or less, and same thing.
Because you wanted to learn or because it was broken?
So I was not naturally a good entrepreneur. It took me, at least 10 years.
Sorry for laughing, but it's the truth.
That was brutal.
I feel the same thing. It's like, it's that you're in the middle. That's how, on the job training. Sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more.
You know, grit is a big part about success, but I could have survived and done well with a little bit less grit. Like it took years for me to learn to take risk, and you can't win. You have to be willing to lose. That is losing is part of the process of learning and succeeding. And so, I've grown to have a point of view for my life that two things. One is I no longer let myself usually get in the weeds. I don't micromanage. I'm detail oriented, I set my bar really high, but I'm okay with failure because at the end of the day, it's part of life, and I'm not the one also that's gonna be doing it.
Yeah.
And so if the first thing I think of when I see one of my employees not fulfill what I had in my mind, it's not, my initial thought is not how did they mess up? It's how did I not communicate well enough? Sometimes it is them, right? Sometimes everyone messes up. Sometimes someone's in a position they shouldn't be in, and it's our job to make sure to transition them to a job that they would enjoy and be good at inside the company or outside. And so, but I used to want to be involved in everything, and you can't, like, at least you can't do what I do where I have multiple things. If you want to be a soup Nazi and do one simple thing, then yes, it's you, right? But that's not building a company. That's building a brand around yourself.
Right.
And, the only time I've ever shown my face was a billboard that was mocking.
Epic billboard for all those who haven't. Have you seen this? Epic billboard. Steve Jobs here, everybody. Sorry. I loved it.
It was funny, but it was like, I literally used it initially as a challenge of like, listen guys, if you guys can't give me an idea of what to put on this billboard that's better than this stupid thing, then I'm putting my face up there. Like, because that's the last thing I ever wanted to do in my life.
Going into that photo shoot, no, let's stay here because you got here and I'm so happy. It was like right above us, isn't it? Or it was close.
It was very above.
For those who don't know, there was a billboard, a very epic, very Steve Jobs-esque photo.
It said drink different and stuff.
Yes. Where he has like this, like I probably studied that thing way too much of like, what is Chip doing?
Oh my God, that like hand positioning.
You were in this position.
Was
like,
the most awkward, weird. Like, how does this guy?
What I'm wanting to know
so
is leading up to that photo shoot, like what was going through, like we have to get the turtleneck, like what was going through your head whenever there was that epic shot of like, we're doing this, pull up the picture, let's do a side by side here, you got to nail this.
I think one of my reasons why I'm generally happy is I don't think too far ahead.
Okay.
So I honestly, like, I don't, it's positive and a negative, it's advantage, disadvantage, but I really don't think too far ahead. Don't dwell on the past. Try to live in the present. And then a saying that I've learned to live by is that enjoying the grass underneath your feet and wanting more is not mutually exclusive, right? And so most people are either enjoy the grass underneath their feet, and so they either love the grass underneath their feet and they don't have any motivation to move forward, or they're never really happy because they're just always wanting more. Yeah. And for me, they're not mutually exclusive. You can do both. You can acknowledge that where you're at is not where you want to go, but be happy and appreciative of where you're at. So
sure, it's we're gonna kind of pivot here. I always like hearing why people come back, and I think the biggest question I have a lot of the times is I was in that same boat too. I lived overseas, I lived in other places in the States, but I came back to Tulsa. Why do people come back to Tulsa? Like, you're out doing your thing, whether it's out of college, you're like, forget this place, or whatever the motto or the mantra that people might have. Why do people return back to this place? Lexi's part of that group as well. She's out and about and she decides to come back. Anyways, I'd love to hear your take. Why do people come back to Tulsa?
So I think originally when we came back, and the main reason was because it was easy. Right? It's super cute and quaint and nice, and has, generally speaking, all 4 seasons. Well, climate change is changing that for everybody, and it was missing a lot of stuff that some of the big cities had, as far as amenities. But at the time, it was easy, right? And I think that a lot of people really, like, there's a group of people that we had that originally got together and started before Thai Pros. There was YP Tulsa, and it was,
I remember.
didn't want to be part of the chamber because the chamber at the time was all people that lived past 41st, and there was no one that believed in downtown.
Right.
That's a lot of things have changed since then, right? But at that point, there was Elliot, there was Kristen Tafer, there was myself. There's a whole bunch of people that got together, Casey Stowe, that tried to figure out how can, we've lived in other places. Like, how can we bring some of this and create some of this stuff that we miss
Yeah.
here in Tulsa? So it makes it a place that we do want to stay.
Yeah.
I remember when my wife first came back and we drove downtown, and she's like, "Where are all the humans?" Like, it was like, oh, it was like lunchtime or something. It was just looking like a ghost town. And 2019 was awesome from a downtown standpoint. I think downtowns are struggling nationwide because of the change in patterns and traffic in Tulsa. After, like, there's a really good podcast in the Wall Street Journal today about death spiral of downtowns. And after I was just in Chicago for a Specialty Coffee Association, and we drove through. I did what I call windshield time with 2 of my employees, and we drove up there and stopped in St. Louis. And like, St. Louis is really struggling, and there's just a lot of variables that have kind of crossed at the same time that I think put us in a really good position. There are a lot of developers, Brian Elliott, for instance, and Sharp and Prices, and that already kind of started that transition anyways, because we had some amazing, gorgeous old buildings that didn't have great occupancy pre-pandemic, and so they had already started that transition. We as a city have really supported, I think, trying to be proactive. Not always successful, but we're, everything's relative. And so, like, the fact that there was a Zero study, I think it was Zero Foundation, that helped identify how many units we actually need in order to maintain the supply-demand equation such that our rental and real estate prices don't skyrocket. And
Right.
we're one of the very few cities that's ever passed, much less of this size, of $75 million over the next 10 years that will be allocated to, which is a drop in the bucket to what's needed, but it's a good start.
Sure.
That is specifically going to be allocated to spur and facilitate housing. What else? Yeah, it's just there's a lot of travel's good because it makes you appreciate what you do have.
Yeah.
I think it's sometimes it's difficult when you don't have a frame of reference or something to compare to.
Right.
Tulsa does have a lot of things going for it.
I find that.
So sorry, real quick to answer your question more specific, because I will go down rabbit holes.
No,
but I think
you're
Tulsa Remote, and listening to the people and the stats on that, of the
Yeah.
fact that over 90-something% stay after the year, and that even from the inception, I think it's in the high 70s, that are still living here today. And so now we have so many amenities, whether it's because of the philanthropy of Mr. Kaiser,
Sure.
or all the efforts of the people I just mentioned, Elliot and myself, and
Yep.
the Prices and everybody, right? That's
Yeah.
that's really been here for decades trying to make it happen.
Yeah.
That those amenities, when people do come now, they're like, oh wow, this is really cool.
Having the foundation, like Tulsa, I think it's, as a Tulsan, and you're here every day, I think perspective, that's what I'm kind of alluding to here, is key, because so many people are caught up in the day-to-day of underappreciating the gathering place. Because this stuff is in your backyard.
Right.
The Tulsa Remotes, the 36 degrees north. Like all these things that are doing really cool things in Tulsa. I don't know what's happening in St. Louis, but it sounds like they're probably in a little bit of a bad situation.
They have a lot of square feet. There's like 1 million square foot
In
building.
just specifically the downtown area.
Because a lot of the buildings, it depends on the building, right? And we're fortunate, there's some of our buildings. So this study that was funded, also a separate study that was funded, that was super proactive and helpful, is that analyzed the inventory of buildings that could be converted, and then rated them into different categories of which ones were the best and easiest to convert based on a set standard of variables and categories.
Sure.
Like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Right? Some big giant. It's like we're redoing the one of the things my wife during the pandemic kept saying pivot, and I was like, I'm not opening a ghost kitchen, and everybody was doing it. And
Yep.
Whenever I see everybody doing it, and my first thought is like, I don't know about this.
Yeah.
And so I started looking at it, and I was like, it was so much work and so much, like none of them really, I think, exist anymore, and at least in Tulsa. And so my pivot was actually just mostly real estate. We ended up buying a building that is now, and then partnered with 36 Degrees North to rehab their new home. It's going to be 100,000+ square feet of new construction that is going to be the top of the food chain when it comes to incubator space and co-working space in the nation. Like, literally awesome. And so
we just toured it. It's amazing.
so like that building was a good example. I sat there and people looked at it.
Right.
I forgot what I was. It's getting late in the day. So it's such a big square because it was just warehouse that I'd seen some plans to turn it into apartments and all that stuff, but getting the windows needed and the egress and the lighting and all that fixed, it was so hard. And we finally got it figured out from financial and code and everything to be able to cut this core down the middle of it. And it's so cool looking.
Right.
I'm super excited for it.
Right. Obviously it was owning Welltown. All this development happening around. I'm super excited about it. But when you said you pivoted into real estate, your goal there was pandemic's happening. Rates at that time were probably pretty low. As far as I remember, they were, at least. Executing on some of these, were you primarily looking at downtown, I would assume, and some of these properties that during the pandemic people aren't doing. They're trying to figure other things out than buy property. So that was your way of pivoting. Obviously, it sounds like it's, as of right now, it's very fruitful for you up to this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's been fun. Like, I think that the pandemic was a good time for everybody to look at themselves in the mirror and figure out what they do and don't like. And
right.
One of the things I did, I walked to work every day. It was 10 miles there and 10 miles back. And that's not true. It's 5 miles there, 5 miles back. And so
10 total. Yeah.
10 total. I do a walk from Gathering Place to Botanical Garden. If no one's ever done it, they should.
To the garden?
And then back.
Oh, wow.
That's 22 miles.
Okay.
We'll stop and have cheese and wine and food at the Botanical Garden.
I love that.
That's cool.
I love that.
So, being in the restaurant business, essentially, there's I don't know if it's true, but there's a saying about Ray from McDonald's was at McDonald's University and was asking the students, like, what kind of business are we in? And someone's raised their hand and says, we're in the hamburger business, we're in the fry business, we're in the Coke business, whatever. And he's like, no, we're in the real estate business. And so, at the end of the day, I was spending significant amounts of money on other people's property. And I keep doing it, but I keep telling myself this is the last time. But it started my passion, I think, for construction and breathing new life into an old building that no one appreciated.
Yeah.
Our Topeca was my first business. Second business, it was Hodges Bin with Noah Bush. And then from there up until the pandemic, we opened a new business about every 9 months. A bunch of them did not survive the pandemic, and some of them had some failures before, but we had Torero. It looks like a museum right now. It's so weird. You walk by and it's like even dusted and the silverware's in place and walk in ready. And then we had Hodges up in Minneapolis that the pandemic ended up killing.
I didn't know you were in Minnesota. Wow. Okay.
And then we had Open Container that we sold a couple of years ago. And then what else was there? And then the fires, Lowood and Hodges. And then a new group of investors have decided to open up two new concepts. One will open up at the end of this month, called Lo-Fi, and it's a listening lounge
Okay.
that has food menu core is pizza. It has a wood fire oven.
Nice.
Was there before.
Yeah.
And we've just changed the decor and the incredible stereo system and record players and reel-to-reels and lots of vinyl and sound panels and
So
DJ booth. And
you're continuing down that route of wanting to stay in the F&B, food and beverage business. Sounds like outside of that, obviously coffee and real estate.
Yep.
You've had failures on the F&B side. Why are you staying there? Why are you continually scratching that itch maybe of wanting to do more, wanting to give people an experience?
For sure. So, I always said that the cliche that food and beverage was full of failure did not take into account that it's one of the only industries that you can literally wake up and say, you know what, I'm going to open a restaurant because I like to cook.
Right.
That doesn't happen with dentistry or astronomy or so many, I'm not,
Yeah.
no
the
one
barrier is pretty low.
I want to be a lawyer. I'm just going to open up put my
Right.
title on the door. And so the challenge, I think, in business and in life is figuring out what you're good at and doing everything you can to not have to do any of the stuff that you're not good at.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And because, I do believe in the rule of 10,000 hours, but so if anyone does something for 10,000 hours with focus, then they're going to be good at it. But it's so much more difficult if you don't enjoy it.
100%. Yes.
And you're never going to enjoy actually doing it even after you are an expert. I've met some, right? There
You're
are
right.
some people that are really unhappy
Right.
that didn't stop when they should have.
Right.
And so the business model made sense to me before. The pandemic has really kind of shifted everything up for multiple reasons and inflationary food cost control,
Yep.
labor cost control, rent control, everything. There's really only two things that you can control, like labor and food cost.
Mm-hmm.
So it's simple from some standpoints, but those two have just gotten to a point that it's very difficult to make the math work. And so, but against my own best judgment, I'm going to try again. Why? Because I love it.
Yeah.
It's super fun. It's really enjoyable. I like to convince myself that I can figure it out, make it work. And it's super enjoyable to work with this team of talented people where everybody brings something different to the ball game, to the team. And there are a few things like it. I mean, it's like theater, right? It's got a sense of manufacturing and complexity of that sense, but it also it's effing live.
Yep.
And so it's like a dance, but at the same time, it has to have been planned out and choreographed, and so it's fun.
Yeah, I think it's very rewarding seeing. For me, it's events. I really enjoy throwing big events and
Yeah, you're a
and
masochist
seeing.
for that, but-
Thank you. I really enjoy seeing day of. Obviously, there's so much work. There's so much effort that goes into these one day, and heaven forbid there's rain. There's something
You
that's
kill it.
gonna.
It's amazing.
And I think that seeing people enter or in the festival grounds or whatever, and you're overhearing things, and you're at that point, it's like a euphoric moment of pleasure. I don't know what else to say. It's like you're like, I was part of this. I was part of putting this together. Obviously, it's a team and it's a team effort, but it just feels just incredible.
Yeah.
And I can't agree with you more of relating if it's just like it's in your blood, it's in your DNA, despite things that happen. It's just at the end of the day who we are.
Events and catering are the same. It's like what I described, but times 10. Like it always impresses me what the size and quality of the events that you put on.
Thank you.
kudos
Thank
to
you. I want to talk about your wife a little bit.
Sure.
I find it very interesting. You guys met in college. You moved away.
Chips and
with
margaritas.
her. Chips and margaritas. What was it like being an expat?
Mm-hmm.
What was it like disconnecting, following the love of your life,
Mm-hmm.
and really connecting back in on her turf, it sounds like, back with her family. I find family and marriage and children and very interesting behind entrepreneurship, because they're the ones that keep you going. You're what you mentioned already. Your wife said, pivot, do the thing, you know? So I have the same thing at home where they're trying to be very supportive and they're obviously very understanding of that. But tell me the early days. Tell me about the early days of this woman that you fell in love with and you chased her down to her country.
For sure. You know, I've always been adventurous and explorer, and I think it's less bravery and more stupidity that I live in the moment and don't think too much far ahead. That I moved my whole life down there, filled up a shipping container, and moved down there. And I got a job. I remember when they were interviewing me, it was a room full of people that they were looking at hiring for this IT manager position, and Unilever requires that you have to at least be able to speak and read English because it's a Dutch Anglo company. For those who don't know, Unilever is like Procter & Gamble. It's
Sure.
They make half the stuff on the shelf. And everyone behind us, we didn't know at the time, but they were all like the CFO and the CEO, and this Dutch guy was the CFO, and he came and talked to me afterwards. He's like, "You know why we picked you?" And I was like, "No." He's like, "We thought you had big cojones for coming down here, thinking you not speaking Spanish,
Right.
and thinking that you could do it." And so, in my mind, they asked me. I remember it was like, "How long do you think it's going to take to learn Spanish?" And in my mind, I was like 6-9 months if I really put my energy behind
Applied
it.
yourself, yeah.
Maybe. But I thought, like, what is the low? They're not going to accept that. They won't hire me. And so I was like, what's the minimum or the maximum? Sorry, that they are going to be okay with. And they
Sure.
said 3 months. And it took me 3 months. So
Wait, they required that of you? Like, hey, we're going to give you the job.
no. They asked.
Okay.
And I said it. In my head, I was thinking, like, what is the number that they? I didn't think they were being patient enough to wait 6 months, but 3 months is close enough. A quarter, quarter to say, okay, that's fine. Let's give this guy a chance.
Yeah.
And I learned.
Was that like a cram session for you? Just like, or you already knew a little bit at that point in time?
I took about, I don't know, 3 weeks or so of
Okay.
like classes with
Okay.
this Cuban teacher. I'd had some classes in high school, Baca and
Yeah.
Agua and
Yeah.
everybody had.
Yeah.
But I remember physically 2 things. One is being exhausted, and 2, a part of my brain physically I could feel turn on that wasn't on. I have yet to execute, but one of my things, we're empty nesters now. My son just graduated as a sophomore in college, and so one of my things when he graduated was I was going to focus some of my time on learning a third language, and because I crave that feeling again, like of being able to turn that part of the brain on that normally isn't on, right? See if it's still
Right.
plasticity or
Right.
if it's
Pliable, ready to,
if it's solidified completely. And then, it was awesome, right? It was beautiful. But at the same time, marriage is hard and it's stressful.
Yep.
Kids don't make it any easier. But a few things worthwhile in life are easy. And we've had our ups and downs, and I love her more than anything. And it's so fun. Each stage is really beautiful. And I think the key is making sure to live in the moment and to appreciate the good and the bad, because cliches exist for a reason. It goes by so fast.
Yeah.
And so, like, the moment I'm in right now, I love. Like, we're empty nesters. We're getting to spend time on ourselves instead of going to see sports games. There were soccer games and basketball games, and that was awesome. And I remember as the basketball games ended for that last season, like, I was so sad that it was going to go away, but it was awesome while it lasted.
That's awesome. I have 4 kiddos, and we're just in the muck of it right now. We're in it 100%. I have
Put your head down.
My oldest is 8. My youngest is 11 months.
Oh gosh.
And it's just, it's figuring out schooling stuff, and it's figuring out just all the intricacies of lost passes. This was the discussion the other night, is like, my gosh, where is his passes? He has one to go to bed. Jones, my youngest, little trail here. Like, we just had 5. Like, what do you do? Me and Chelsea, my wife, are just running around the house.
Yeah.
And it's just like, and then you just, at the end of the night, you like lay down and you can't stop talking about them. They frustrate the crap out of you. They piss you off. And at the end of the day, you love them freaking to death.
Yeah.
So you're at that moment of life of like rearview mirror type stuff, where it's hard for me because I'm in the middle of it.
And you don't sleep, and you don't have time.
100%. And it's very interesting because I talk to a lot of different people at different stages, obviously. And I think that appreciating where you're at is obviously the key here, but it's a lot harder when they're screaming kids and you're not mentally there because you had half the night sleep gone because a screaming kid or whatever the case may be.
It is a fight or flight intensity that having a child is kind of like war.
Yeah. 100%.
You really do have to learn to balance. There's a really cool conversation I had once years ago with a friend that was about the definitions of empathy versus sympathy. And, you know, there's, I think, a unhealthy amount of empathy, right, exists. And so sympathy is something completely different. You can sympathize with someone else, but you don't have to let that emotion weigh you down necessarily. There's a certain amount of empathy that makes you more sympathetic. But if you're not able to detach, then you're, sorry, I've never really figured out how to turn my my watch off.
You're good.
And so with the kids, like, you just kind of have to go numb for a little bit. And it just depends on the child and then the time of life. And just when it gets hard, for me, I just had to keep my vision on the horizon, because I knew that just like it got really hard.
Was work life, obviously it's entrepreneurship at the end of the day, was work life balance, was that a difficult thing that you struggle with, or were you good at separation?
No, I'm really bad at
Same.
There was a while where Marguerite and I were both working. I think it's a testament to our marriage that we survived somehow. We think very differently when it comes to business. The way that we managed it was that she had her boundaries and I had my boundaries, and so we tag teamed a lot. We had some support from every once in a while from my parents, but it was really just great tag teaming. And she is, we were just talking before about how she's amazing, because one of her master skills is that she can just open her fridge and make something really relatively quick without having to plan. And I used to like to cook, but I was more methodical, and I had a recipe and I'd measure everything out, and so it's neither as good as what she makes nor
right.
And so I'm usually the cleaner and she's usually the cook. But I mean, I remember where I worked, there was about a year and a half to 2 years where I worked 100 to 110 hours a week. Took off one day a year. That was Christmas. And that was it.
And that was juggling your day job and then your roasting night job, or?
Yep. It was accounting. I was roasting. I was doing all of the customer relations and sales and deliveries and everything, right? And I think that's where is that point I was saying that took me so long to learn, was that I didn't have to do everything. I shouldn't. Not only do I not have to be doing everything, I shouldn't be doing everything. And I didn't really know how to hire. Knowing how to hire, knowing how to create culture, knowing how to hire. What is it? Hire slow and fire fast. The million different books that are written about running a business.
Right.
And so I was stubborn. I think in hindsight, I could have reduced that 5 years to probably a good 2 to 5 years instead of 10 years. So it was the 10 years it took me to finally begin to learn could have been reduced to 2 to 5.
Sure. entrepreneurship is a very loaded word because there's different personalities that fall into entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. There's different loves. There's different things that cause you to think, you know what? I can do this. Mm-hmm. And you know what? I can do this better. Mm-hmm. But I think it's interesting whenever I talk to guys like yourself, where you're finding your own path and your own way of doing things. And maybe he's a little stubborn up front. When I hear 10 years, I think of, oh, he might be a little stubborn in some areas because he didn't want to either let go of something or maybe just uneducated and he had to educate himself towards some different things. For me, it was, I feel like, I think I still struggle with this to this day. A lot of the times I view my employees as friends. Mm-hmm. And it's hard for me to step up and I can be the leader. I can do the leadership thing, mm-hmm. but sometimes when it comes down to, I don't know, disciplinary type of situations or correction along the course or even firing, it's not easy.
Yep.
Because I do care about that family and the husband at home or the wife at home with kids. It gets a little bit complicated. So my own story is like, man, those are very difficult. I've gotten better over the time. Just like you, you just learn the parts of entrepreneurship that you're not good at. You're like, well, I'm here. I have to learn this.
It is. I mean, being a small entrepreneur is very difficult because you have to wear a lot of hats and yeah, and sometimes there are things you shouldn't be doing. You're doing your best, but you're not good at it. And the tolerance from both customers and employees nowadays is just, it was never big and it's just gotten smaller. So, I luckily got to a point where now we have, full-time marketing person. Alex is freaking amazing. We have HR and we got director of operations. We have people that can really excel in the positions that they're in, and so that I don't have to do everything.
Yeah.
Because I'm not good at it.
Right.
I'm good at some things.
What are the things, if you were to allocate all your time, and maybe this is a great closing question, if you were to say, okay, aside from family time and wife time and kid, if you were to allocate your working day mm-hmm. to one or two things, it could be this, it could be one of the it could be anything across the board of the real estate, whatever. What would you allocate those hours to? Maybe one or two.
Oh man. Like what I'm still doing, and I think I'll probably be doing for the next year to 2 years.
Okay.
Is rebuilding and improving the foundations of structure that exists in each business. There's the continuity aspect. So when, there's a friend of mine that said that when they would hire, they would ask, where do you see yourself after XYZ company? Like when they'd be hiring, assuming that the overwhelming majority of people they're hiring are not going to be there in 5 years or 10 years, right? And making that okay, right? And so having the systems in place so that when someone does leave, it's not back to ground zero. A lot of it seemed to be working before the pandemic and it all fell apart. And so we're still in the process of building that foundation back up. I think my favorite time is running, and I'm going to go run Turkey Mountain with a friend at 3:30 and talk business and think business. That's where I love stepping back. If I could spend if I had a choice of where I put my time, it would be stepping back and looking and having the time and ability to look at the big picture and what actually is not working. It's too easy in life to get micro focused on something, and that, in my opinion, is never going to solve anything.
Right.
And so, yeah, I love the ability finally that I'm starting to have again to step back, analyze what's going on, what resources are needed, who's the best to address it, how do I trust but verify, how do I
Right.
create metrics.
Right.
Call it the train Rolodex. Like whenever I go running, I feel like all the different ideas just kind of keep tree structuring and building and options, and that's really fun to me.
Yeah.
Problem solving.
So the 30,000 foot view
Mm-hmm.
is where you would like to spend majority of your time, and just seeing everything more laid out, like what you're talking about with structure and are we doing this, and almost like visually outsider point of view type of thing where you're not stuck in the weeds in any one area.
Yeah, I mean, like I really loved. This was the first project for I call it our company name. Our ownership is Bahia Blanca, White Whale, but that building ended up getting managed. We chose this gentleman that's running it, Matt Newman, at Fishless Desert, and he kills it. Like he's so much better. I'm good at a lot of things he does, but I'm not excellent. And it's so nice to have someone that I know is better than I am.
Right.
And not have to get in the weeds necessarily. So even on something new that I'm doing, real estate.
Right.
I am finding that I'm much better at the high level of knowing a little bit about a lot of things instead of a lot about little things.
Before we sign off here, anything that you want to say, anything that you're excited about, last minute stuff? We kind of did a bit of a meandering of a little bit of your life and what you're involved with.
For sure.
Obviously, lo-fi is maybe an exciting thing that you'd like to highlight, or
First, I just want to thank you for doing this, but also just in general for everything that you do for Tulsa. And, I still really proud to call Tulsa home, and it's because of all the individuals that have made it not just a place that you boomerang back to because it's easy, but because it actually is more fun than where they were. And so cheers to everybody that is still making that effort. And I think what I'm most excited about is we're really getting to a place where people can be passionate about crafts again. I think the pandemic made it so difficult for anyone to really put any kind of energy behind anything, and there was the Great Resignation where they just kind of people rotated and realized that the other jobs were just as shitty as the job they had.
Right, grass is always greener type thing.
Yeah. And so I'm nervously excited about the progress that downtown's going to have again. I'm very aware that it's going to take probably a good 2 to 4 years.
Yep.
But we have like 1,000 units that are about to come online this year for the next 12 plus months. In the next couple of years, there's probably another 1,000 to 3,000 at least. Not only will I think that plus a convention center plus $500-600 million that's being invested in the medical district, a lot of people don't know about, is going to be a game changer. And so it's tough in some ways to see, because you just don't see the traffic downtown that you used to. It's like, I don't know, 70 something percent that it used to. But I think that we're on a trajectory, and the not only the fixed investment that is actually happening, but this stuff that's being talked about makes me excited about what is going to happen, what it's going to look like in a good 3 years.
I could completely agree with you there.
And then Lo-Fi, obviously.
Yeah, Lo-Fi.
Lo-Fi will open up.
What's right next door? Real quick, just give us a tidbit. What are you putting in the old Palace place?
So we found a group of investors. Some of them had been in our other businesses. Some of them are new to our investor group. We usually do each business as a completely separate EIN.
Yep.
Different set
Makes
of
sense.
investors. Yep. And, Noah's really the idea generator. And we bought these assets. We'd been discussing the idea of whether it was made sense. James had been wanting to get out of the industry and retire. And so Palace and Prairie Fire Pie, we bought the assets, and the first one to open up is going to be the Prairie Fire Pie space. We've converted it into what is more of a listening lounge. It's become kind of trendy, that is going to have a very large selection of vinyl, some reel-to-reel. It's got a reel-to-reel player, some record players. We redid the whole back bar. We added a DJ booth, some acoustic treatments. And then Trevor's and Issa have been just destroying it on R&D for pizza. It was really fun to watch it go from something that was just okay to good to something that was quality that was amazing, to Quinn working with Noah and the wine selection, and we're gonna have some sommeliers on staff.
Nice.
And I think a focus on natural wines, and I'm just gonna try to keep helping them try to make money out of it.
Sure.
And then next door, we've already started the design process. Everything just takes longer.
Sure.
I always use it as a point of reference, and it was amazing. Before the pandemic, we in 3 months gutted, designed, and built Atlas Coding School, which is a 7,000 square foot floor with like a 2,500 square foot mezzanine. We built the mezzanine, steel mezzanine from scratch. We did the whole thing in 3 months, and it was just nuts. Like, you can't even get a permit in 3 months now. So my expectations are like 6 months at least, probably.
Yeah.
We'll do a concept called Ava June's. It's named after Noah's grandmother.
Oh, cool.
It is going to be a French brasserie-inspired concept that, we don't like to usually pigeonhole ourselves. Pulses to, it's not big enough really to have a all-in,
very specific.
Yep.
Yep.
And so, a good example that Noah gave me when he was explaining his idea was, oysters are super common in that style of restaurant, but you would never pair it with tequila or mezcal.
Right.
And he really thinks that's one of the best pairings. So
that's funny.
That is the idea. So right now we're trying to figure out I'm super happy with the way that Lo-Fi looks, and we're starting to hire and train this week and next week. And then we'll open up I think it's 29th, is it? Sometime around there.
That's awesome.
And then we go back into the design phase for the look at the palace space as an empty shell and figure out what works.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Absolutely.
You're a wealth of knowledge. Just chatting with you, we've known each other, but just chatting with you, I can already tell you're a very smart man, much smarter than myself.
More dumb than smart.
I think that it takes a very
it's a balance.
Committed person, very special person to build what you build. So commend you obviously for all your efforts, accolades. I mean, you're killing it. So thank you again for being on the podcast.
I appreciate you.
Yeah.